Author Alvin J. Schexnider includes a backgrounder on his Mayfield and Schexnider family lines on pages 14 to 17 of his fabulous Black family heritage book titled Mayfield and Schexnider, Portrait of a Family. The backgrounder reads, "This book, Mayfield and Schexnider, Portrait of a Family," reflects the strong role of both the paternal and maternal sides of my family. The Mayfield family had as strong an influence on my life and that of my sisters and brothers as the Schexniders. Our parents exerted the most significant influence in our lives, but the Mayfields were never far away. My maternal great-grandparents were Lily Bell Davis Moore and Joel Moore Sr. Following his death, she married Edward Mack Hopkins. My maternal grandparents were Arlene Moore Mayfield and Rufus Mayfield Sr. My paternal great-grandparents were Rosa Raymond Schexnider and Hilary Schexnider. My paternal grandparents were Celestine Joseph Schexnider and Aristelle Schexnider. Growing up in Lake Charles, Louisiana in the 1950s and 60s, I took a lot for granted, never stopping to consider how fortunate I was to be a part of a big extended family living in the same city. The Mayfield and Schexnider families lived within 2 miles of one another, and walking between the families' homes was common. In addition to my parents, my grandmother, Arlene, and her son, my uncle Rufus Mayfield Jr., were key figures in my development in the early stages of my life. My grandmother Arlene had enormous influence on the entire family, including her children and grandchildren. She was a woman of drive and determination who stressed the importance of education and made sure that her 3 youngest daughters received a college education. My parents encouraged us to go to college, but it was Arlene Mayfield who hounded me to make sure it happened. She believed in me and pushed me gently but persistently until I cobbled together enough money to enroll in college. When I started in September 1964, tuition, room, and board was $300 for one semester. That was the sum total of my resources, along with maybe $50 in pocket change when I started at Grambling. I knew, though, that if I got my foot in the door, there would be no turning back. And I haven't. The members of the family who lived closest to us were mainly from my mother's side, the Mayfields. The Mayfield family was large, with 12 children. In addition to my mother and her parents, mother's brother and 2 younger sisters lived in Lake Charles. My mother's brother, Uncle Rufus, and his wife, Aunt Marion, and my mother's sister, Aunt Janice, and her husband, Uncle Lee Sanford, lived within 3 blocks of our house. My maternal grandparents, having separated in the 1930s, each owned their own home and lived a few blocks from each other. Given the proximity of homes, I saw quite a bit of both sides. of the family. My father had one sister who lived in Lake Charles, Aunt Rosa, and they were very close. He had a brother, Uncle Willie, Galveston, Texas, and four sisters in Houston, Texas. Aunt Georgiana, or four siblings in Houston, Texas. Aunt Georgiana, Uncle Joe, Aunt Olivia, and Aunt May. Another of his siblings, Aunt Leanna, and her family lived farthest away in San Francisco, California. My father stayed in close touch with his sisters and brothers, and so did my mother. We regularly visited Aunt Rosa, who lived in the Schneider family home. And we often visited at the home of my maternal grandmother, Arlene Mayfield. Family gathered often. I was always happy to see the aunts and uncles and cousins who lived in Texas, California, and New York when they came to Lake Charles. My paternal grandfather, Aristel Schneider, died when I was almost 5, but I got to know my maternal grandfather, Rufus Mayfield Sr., quite well. He lived close by and was very fond of my mother, his eldest daughter. He lived alone and stopped by occasionally for breakfast with Blackwater, as he referred to coffee. My mother took care of his laundry and made sure that he had hot meals on the weekend. The Schneider children delivered these meals to our grandfather like clockwork. My mother's youngest brother was Peter Mayfield, whose given name was Arthur. He lived in California. Her 3 sisters, Ernestine, known as Fritz, Christine, known as Brown Baby, and Effie Lou, known as Lou Baby, lived in New York. When they visited with their children during the holidays, it was always a grand celebration with lots of food and fun. It was great seeing my aunts and uncles and listening to them reminiscing about old times and enjoying each other's company. It was special just being in the presence of a big family, listening to their stories, witnessing occasional conflict, and soaking up as much information as I could about some family members I knew only by name. For example, my grandmother talked a lot about her brother, Joe Moore. He lived in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and her sister Manila. Both were deceased, but it was clear that she'd loved them dearly and missed them very much. The Mayfields were a big family who interacted with each other a lot. My mother spent a lot of time with her family, although I sensed at times that 1 or 2 siblings could at times be a bit much to be around. The youngest siblings looked up to Mother, but 1 or 2 siblings closer to her in age could be difficult. My mother's 3 youngest sisters were school teachers. 2, Janice and Janet, lived in Lake Charles. Before the days of childcare, my mother kept their children, Lyle and Lisa Sanford and Paula Teet, until they entered kindergarten. They spent a lot of time at our home, and I viewed them as younger siblings. Aunt Lou Baby, Effie Lou, lived in DeRidder, Louisiana. She was a single parent and was a school teacher. Her daughter, Jane, spent a lot of time at our house also. When Aunt Lou moved to New York in 1965, Jane stayed with us an entire year while Aunt Lou got settled and found a teaching job. My sisters and brothers and I spent a lot of time with the Mayfield side of the family and, consequently, absorbed a lot of information. On the Schneider side, though we visited Aunt Rosa regularly, neither she nor my father talked much about family. We knew cousin Lily, who lived with us until she died in 1954, and our cousins Jake, Mac, and Andrea. But we didn't know how they were related on the Schneider side. I was determined to learn more. My father's mother died in 1941 before I was born. I remember his father, Aristell Schneider, whom we called Pop. He died in March 1950, 2 months before my 5th birthday. Pop was the first person I saw in a coffin. I recalled kneeling with my father as he prayed beside Pop's casket at Cambrai Funeral Home. Because my dad talked little about his family, I hoped that when I became an adult, he would open up about his background. These hopes were dashed when my father died at age 49. Consequently, I have had to dig and uncover information on my own in a painstaking but deliberate fashion. Aunt Rosa, who lived in Lake Charles to the age of 89, was also helpful in gathering information about the Schneider family. In her later years, my younger brother Kenneth was her caregiver until she died in 2008. Aunt Rosa stayed in the family home after Pop died in 1950. She told Kenneth that some papers and records were in an old trunk that belonged to my grandfather. When Aunt Rosa passed, Kenneth found a treasure trove of documents, including the deed to the home purchased in 1937. Kenneth knew of my interest in researching our family history and passed the documents to me. As mentioned previously, Aunt Georgiana seemed to have a lot of information and provided many helpful leads to relatives in St. Martinville. During college and after I graduated, we corresponded regularly. Our conversations enabled me to connect with a cousin in Peoria, Illinois. This tidbit of information opened the door to additional pathways for my research. In November 2018, a month after the death of my brother Kenneth, I was feeling as though I was running out of time. I asked Virginia, my wife, to help me find a cousin, Winsley West Durand, the son of Enola Wiltz Durand. Aunt Georgiana had told me that West lived in Peoria, Illinois. Through a Grambling schoolmate from Bunkie, Louisiana, who knew the Durand family well, I had confirmed that Wes indeed lived in Peoria and that he had a sister, Ollie Durand, whom I knew through the Newman Club at Grambling. I was therefore determined to find Wes, which I did thanks to Virginia's help. After a few minutes searching the white pages, Virginia found a Winsley Durand, the third, in Omaha, Nebraska. I called the number and left a message explaining that I was trying to contact Wes Durand. Within an hour, I got a call from his father in Peoria. It was understandably an awkward introduction. But after a few minutes, I assured Wes that I was trying to gain information about my paternal grandfather's side of the family. Wes told me that his son had informed him about my call and that his legal name is Winsley, but he goes by Wes. He also informed me that indeed Enola was his mother and that she and his sister had died. Wes put me in touch with another cousin, Catherine Wilkes Williams. In July 2019, while visiting friends in Houston, Texas, I got to meet her. Catherine, in turn, put me in touch with yet another cousin, Chad Nora of Lafayette, Louisiana. At first, Chad was skeptical, even though I provided background information that I had shared with Wes and Catherine. In order to assure Chad that I was legitimate, I scanned and forwarded a photograph of my grandmother, Celestine Joseph Schneider. Chad immediately recognized the photo as the same one hanging on the wall at the home of his great-grandmother in St. Martinville, a half-hour drive from Lafayette. Chad was flabbergasted when he saw the photograph. He had seen it many times, but he'd had no idea who she was. Now he had evidence that we were related, and he promised to help me conduct more research. In June 2020, I attended the funeral of a first cousin on the Mayfield side, Lyle Sanford, who died unexpectedly of a heart ailment. This provided me an opportunity to visit Chad Nora and his family in Lafayette. They welcomed me with warmest hospitality. Chad drove me to St. Martinville, where I visited the home of his great-grandmother Philomena Simon Wilkes, the niece of my grandmother Celestine Joseph Schneider. Chad also took me to the Catholic cemetery, where his great-grandparents and other relatives are buried. Although I had read about such cemeteries, I had never seen a cemetery with blacks on one side and whites on the other. From this backgrounder, we gather that Schneider wrote this book in part to show how his maternal and paternal lines combine to form his identity, to show gratitude for his family fortune of closeness, to thank ancestral positive influencers, to honor ancestors, to demonstrate the importance of education in his family heritage, to show family naming patterns, to reveal the results of his deliberate research, to complete his mission before time runs out, and to chronicle his genealogy tourism experiences. Here's a taste of how both college and cars feature prominently in the Mayfield Schneider clan. Even though I did not know how I would pay for it, as an adolescent, I was determined to go to college. Several factors influenced my resolve. First was an innate desire to achieve. Also, I had strong role models in my mother's younger sisters who were teachers and whose husbands were also teachers. Uncle Rufus's wife, Aunt Marion, was a teacher, as were many of his customers. Because of segregation, Black professionals, teachers, doctors, and businessmen were spread throughout every neighborhood in the community. We didn't recognize it at the time, but segregated housing patterns provided role models that greatly influenced aspirations among young Black youth in every home, no matter their socioeconomic status. Teachers predominated among middle-class Blacks in Lake Charles. They had nice homes, drove fancy cars, dressed well, and enjoyed a good standard of living. They carried themselves with dignity and self-respect, and they were esteemed members of the Black community. Another important influence for me was my grandmother, Arlene Moore Mayfield. More than anyone else, I credit her with keeping me focused and motivated toward college, even if I didn't know how I was going to finance it. This helped me appreciate that one must first have a vision in order to achieve goals in life. While I didn't disparage it, teaching never appealed to me. I always desired a white-collar job in the corporate world. Nonetheless, although I had no interest in teaching, I found myself pursuing an academic career, advancing through the ranks to tenured professor and ultimately university president. Having eschewed teaching, I ended up enjoying an academic career that spanned more than 4 decades. Because I didn't have money to enroll in college after graduating high school, it was important to me that my children would not have to face that challenge. As soon as we could, Virginia and I started saving so that our children would have money for college. The decade of the 1970s was filled with several personal and professional events. In September 1970, I was discharged from the Army after serving in Vietnam. 14 days later, on September 28th, I enrolled in graduate school at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, to pursue a doctorate in political science. I bought my first car when I returned from Vietnam and enrolled in graduate school. It was a Volkswagen 1969. There we see the 1969 Volkswagen, and Schneider goes on to say, I had always wanted to own a sports car. So in 1974, I bought my second car, a Datsun, later renamed Nissan, 260Z. I enjoyed that car and drove it from Louisiana to New York and back several times. It's pictured with my third car that I restored and kept for 38 years, a 1954 Chrysler New Yorker Newport. It reminded me of my dad's 1953 Chrysler New Yorker Deluxe. His was a 4-door sedan, while mine was a sporty 2-door hardtop. I sold it in 2015 after buying another sports car, a 2015 Corvette Stingray. And again, there are his Datsun 260Z and 1954 Chrysler New Yorker Newport pictured. We see even more of the family's relationship with cars. These are the author's 1954 New Yorker Newport on the left in the background, and his uncle Rufus Mayfield Jr.'s 1952 Oldsmobile 88 on the right in the background. And Schneider says, in the 1950s, it was fashionable to be photographed with a new car, probably because most could only afford a used car. Being photographed with your car was not unlike being photographed with your horse in the golden days of the West. Both were status symbols. Uncle Rufus Jr. preferred the Oldsmobile. He owned 1952, 1955, and 1965 models. From the college and car discussion, we again get some of the reasons that Schneider wrote this Black family heritage book. Again, to tell the stories such that he prominently situates education, and we additionally get that he wants to show how cars feature prominently in the Mayfield Schneider clan. So overall, we get from some of Schneider's words in the book and his background that he wrote Mayfield and Schneider, Portrait of a Family, for at least 30 reasons, including some overlap. Among the reasons are to thank family members and others who helped instill ancestral knowledge, to follow other Black genealogy enthusiasts' example, to distinguish one's own family story from other people's, to help untangle some of the complex network of family background, to explore the social capital of friendships, to show how maternal and paternal lines combine to form an identity, to show gratitude for family fortune of closeness, to thank ancestral positive influencers, to complete before time runs out, to chronicle genealogy tourism experiences, to situate education in the family heritage, and to show how cars feature prominently in the Mayfield Schneider clan. That's it for our initial discussion of the Mayfield and Schneider Black Family Heritage Book, subtitled Portrait of a Family. Be sure to check out the whole HBCUHeritageHome.com podcast and the several series about why we write Black genealogy books in order to get your fill of all things Black genealogy books.